Well, hello dragons, and welcome to this instructional video for Lesson 12, Part 2, Foreign Exchange and Currencies. The main idea behind this economics lesson is nations rely on a system of foreign exchange when they trade because the value of their currencies are often unequal. With that in mind, by the end of watching this video, you will be able to explain why foreign exchange rates are necessary, describe how a nation determines its balance of payments, and identify the significance of the balance of trade. Now that the outcomes for this lesson have been shared with you, let's get started. In 2024, there were 195 nations in the world, each with its own government and national currency. National currencies such as dollars, pesos, and rupees generally are accepted in payment for goods and services within a nation's borders. To participate in international trade, however, nations must have a way of determining the values of their currencies in relation to one another. Markets exist for the buying and selling of national currencies, just as they do for stocks, bonds, and other commodities. These currency markets are known as foreign exchange markets. When a business in one country imports items, it makes payments in the exporting nation's currency. When a business in another country exports items, it also needs to receive payment in its own currency. Foreign exchange markets are designed to resolve these situations. Through the foreign exchange markets, currencies are converted into other currencies. Once the value of one currency is determined in relation to another, a foreign exchange rate for the two has been established. In the United States, foreign exchange rates are expressed in two ways. The first is the number of units of another nation's currency that equal $1. In May 2024, for example, $1 US equaled 155.22 Japanese yen and 0.92 euro. The second is the US dollar value for each unit of foreign currency. At that time, the Japanese yen was worth $0.0064 and the euro was worth $1.09. Since World War II, nations have used one of two foreign exchange rate systems, the adjustable peg system and the floating or flexible system. In an adjustable peg system, the currency of one nation was initially pegged or established in relation to US dollars, which had a fixed price in gold. The relationship was not fixed permanently, however. As economic situations changed, nations could change the exchange rate of their currency with currencies of other nations. This new rate would remain intact until one country chose to change the relationship between its currency and that of other nations. The adjustable peg exchange rate system was used from 1944 to 1971. Adjustable peg exchange rates were introduced at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. At that conference, 44 allied nations agreed that each nation should define its currency in terms of US dollars, with an ounce of gold worth $35. Once set, these rates established base rates with all other currencies. Further, with this exchange rate system, each nation agreed to keep its currency stable in relation to other countries' currencies. The Bretton Woods Conference established the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, to make the system work. This organization, based in Washington, D.C., promotes international monetary cooperation, currency stabilization, and international trade. In 2024, 190 countries were members of the IMF. At the heart of this system was the assumption that international trade partners would remain unchanged. For more than 20 years, this system worked relatively well, with few currency changes. As international trade patterns began to change rapidly during the 1960s and 1970s, however, countries found it increasingly difficult to maintain established exchange rates under the adjustable peg system. When one nation's currency decreases in value relative to other currencies, devaluation or depreciation has occurred. When a nation's currency is devalued, its products become cheaper to other nations. At the same time, other nations' products become more expensive to buyers in the nation that has devalued its currency. On the other hand, when a nation's currency increases in value compared to other currencies, appreciation has occurred. Following this appreciation, that nation's products will become more expensive for people who purchase them in other countries. Additionally, other countries' products will become relatively less expensive in the nation with the appreciating currency. Because of the constant changes in international trade patterns, nations were unable to rely on the adjustable peg system, and in 1971, a new system, based on floating exchange rates, was established. With floating exchange rates, the value of a currency is determined by the laws of demand and supply. As a result, currency values can change from one minute to the next. These constant changes in the exchange value of a nation's currency can have both positive and negative effects. For example, during the mid-1980s, the demand for US dollars was high. Foreign investors wanted to buy dollars to invest in US businesses and securities, and the US dollar was viewed as one of the world's most secure currencies because of the strength of the US government and a low US inflation rate. In addition, many people around the world relied on dollars as a medium of exchange and investment. As a result of these factors, the US dollar appreciated in value. This appreciation led to what economists call a strong dollar, which has more purchasing power relative to other currencies. The strong dollar had a negative effect on U.S. exporters, who sold products to other nations, while having a positive effect on U.S. consumers buying foreign goods. In other words, foreign-made goods became less expensive in U.S. markets, and goods made in the United States became more expensive in foreign markets. To understand how a strong dollar affects exports and imports, consider the following example. Suppose that 83 Mexican pesos equal a single US dollar. At that exchange rate, an item priced at $100 would sell in Mexico for 8,300 pesos. However, if the exchange rate changes as a result of the dollar's appreciation, so that 100 pesos equal a dollar, it would take 10,000 pesos instead of 8,300 to buy the US item. Clearly, this change in the exchange rate would reduce the quantity of U.S. goods demanded in Mexico. The quantity of Mexican goods demanded in the United States would increase, as those goods would decrease in price when the exchange rate changed. A Mexican manufacturer who initially priced his or her products to be sold in the United States at the equivalent of 8,300 pesos would have required Americans to pay $100 for that item. However, after the change in relative currency values to 100 pesos per dollar, Americans could buy the same item for $83 each. This price decrease would lead to an increase in the quantity of Mexican goods demanded in the United States. The previous examples assumed that the forces of demand and supply acted without government involvement. In reality, however, governments do intervene from time to time in foreign exchange markets to keep the value of their own or other nations' currencies from rising either too much or too little. At times, governments have stepped in to influence the value of their currencies. The economies of the world are linked by foreign exchange markets. Traditionally, the most important function of a foreign exchange market has been to convert one currency into an equivalent amount of a second currency. This currency conversion is needed for three types of international transactions: trade, tourism and travel, and investing. Each of these types of international transactions requires a record of payment and exchange. Understanding a nation's economic health is much like understanding that of an individual. Individuals earn income by supplying labor and other productive services in the market, and in turn, they spend their income buying goods and services in the market. If they earn more than they spend, they have savings. On the other hand, if they spend more than they earn, they accumulate debt. This debt may be financed by various types of borrowing, such as the use of credit cards or loans. However, there are limits to the amount of debt that individuals can accumulate. These limits usually depend on consumers' ability to repay the debt. Credit will be discussed more fully in Lesson 13. Nations conduct business in much the same way. For example, the United States buys more than it sells to other nations during certain years, and sells more to other nations than it buys in others. The nations that buy more than they sell must finance those purchases either by borrowing from or selling assets to other nations, or by allowing other nations to hold their currency. A nation's balance of payments is an annual accounting record of all the payments and receipts occurring between its residents, businesses, and governments, and the residents, businesses, and governments of other nations. The U.S. balance of payments provides information about finances and investment between the United States and all its trading partners. The balance of payments is divided into the current account and the capital account. The current account shows the dollar value of goods and services that U.S. citizens and companies bought from and sold to other countries, the income that Americans and U.S. multinational corporations earned in other countries, and the income that foreign individuals and companies earned in the United States. The capital account portion of the balance of payments keeps track of the flow of money or capital between nations. Like individuals, governments and corporations make their investments in places that offer the highest rate of return, accompanied by safety and other factors. For example, relatively higher interest rates in the United States are usually accompanied by an increase in foreign capital flowing into the United States. If interest rates are relatively low in the United States, then foreign capital likely will be invested in other nations. The international flow of money for investment purposes is nothing new. As of 2022, other nations had more than $5.25 trillion directly invested in the United States. In that same year, Japan, the largest foreign investor in the United States, owned more than $712 billion of U.S. assets, including such well-known U.S. businesses as Firestone Tire and Rubber and Columbia Pictures. When both the current and capital accounts are totaled, rarely will the total expenditures in other nations be balanced exactly with the receipts from other nations. Generally, a nation will run a current account deficit and a capital account surplus, or a current account surplus and a capital account deficit. The difference between a nation's imported and exported products is known as its balance of trade. This merchandise balance of trade has historically been the most important factor in determining the nation's overall balance of payments. When the United States exports more than it imports, it has a trade surplus. The last year the United States had a trade surplus in goods and services was 1981. When the United States imports more than it exports, as is generally the case, it has a trade deficit. The United States has experienced ongoing trade deficits since the early 1970s. When the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, dramatically increased the price of oil, the United States had to increase its oil expenditures. That additional spending represented a sharp rise in the dollar value of imports into the United States and resulted in a trade deficit. The U.S. trade deficit persisted because of a lag in productivity in the United States compared to other nations, such as Japan, Singapore, and South Korea. As productivity increased in these nations, their goods became more competitive in global markets and relatively less expensive in the United States. The problem was aggravated by the rise in the value of the dollar against other currencies. As this occurred, it became even more expensive for people in other nations to buy U.S. goods. As Americans purchased more imported goods, such as cars and electronics, and as U.S. exports grew far more slowly, the trade deficit widened. Furthermore, it became less expensive for Americans to buy foreign-made goods. In the 1990s, however, U.S. productivity began to rise. As a result, in 1995, 1996, and 1997, the United States grew increasingly competitive in the area of international trade, while overall, since that time, the U.S. has become less competitive. So that's the way it is with Lesson 12, Part 2, Foreign Exchange and Currencies. At this point, you should know that foreign exchange rates are necessary to resolve trading surpluses or deficits between nations engaging in trade. Nations determine its balance of payments by calculating the current account with the capital account, and the balance of trade has significantly determined a nation's overall balance of payments. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to have the entire catalog of economics videos available at your fingertips. Click the subscribe button and then click the follow bell to receive notifications as to when the channel is updated. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in class, Dragons.